How is everybody? Good. Glad to hear it. Welcome to Forum. I'm Kyle. I teach some biology here. Some of you I know, some of you I don't know. I'm happy to be able to introduce our Forum speaker today, who is Ginny Miller. Ginny is in her first year at Heston. She's from Harrisonburg, Virginia. She's in the pre-nursing track. Ginny likes long walks. She likes baking. She likes adventures. And so she's excited to be able to share with you all time that she spent as a gap year in Anchorage, Alaska. So there will be time for questions after her presentation. I'll have a microphone, so hold on to those questions and I'll bring a mic around at the end. So please help me to welcome Ginny.
Hello? Okay, cool. So I was standing on the side of this mountain and I was picking blueberries just outside of Anchorage, and I asked myself, what am I doing here? I just hiked up the mountain with 3 other guys who I didn't know, and I was going to live with them for the next 10 months. As we were driving to the hike, I learned that they were all former cross-country runners, which did not boost my confidence. I was on the mountain to pick blueberries, but the reason why I was in Anchorage was a bigger story. As Kyle said, I'm Ginny, and I'm going to be talking about my gap year where I served in Anchorage, Alaska. This past year, I served in Anchorage with a program called Service Adventure, which is a part of Mennonite Mission Network. I heard about Service Adventure through my school, and when I learned that they had a unit in Alaska, it piqued my interest. Service Adventure is set up as a gap year program for young adults ages 17 to 20, and it helps them gain life experience and serve for a year. It's a 10-month program, and during those 10 months, the participants live in a unit house together, they serve for 40 hours a week, and participate in community building activities in the house and in the surrounding area. So this is a picture of my unit, and I lived with them, spent most of my time with them, and they became my little family. So as I look back at my experiences in Alaska, it is no surprise that the seasons of my life seem to echo the seasons of nature. Spending so much time walking to service and taking the bus made it pretty easy to link my life to the weather. When I talk about each season, I'll mention my service placements or personal life, and then I'll also talk about my adventures that I had with my housemates. And at the end, I'll tell you what I learned. So when I flew into Alaska at the end of August, it felt like fall. It was at least 20 degrees colder than I was used to, and so kind of just decided it was fall. After 2 weeks of fun times and adventures, which was officially orientation, we were reminded that we had to actually do service. In my year in Alaska, I served at 2 different placements. I served at the Children's Lunchbox, which is a kitchen that makes meals for kids who need them free of charge. And I also served at Faith Christian Daycare, where I ended up teaching 2nd graders. Now, during my first week of service, it was very clear from the get-go that there was a lot to learn at both of my placements. At the daycare, I was learning the schedule, the kids' names, the rules, what my job was, and I also learned that the Anchorage School District had all of their kids doing schooling online because of COVID, so the daycare was taking on the role of facilitating their learning. This meant that there was a classroom for each grade, and daycare workers were standing in as teachers and helping the kids get their work done. 2 2nd graders did not have a teacher, so I was quickly placed in that role. At the Children's Lunchbox, I was doing mostly small tasks while observing what was happening in the kitchen. I quickly learned who was in charge, the typical schedule, what was common, and what were common everyday tasks. At the Children's Lunchbox, the kitchen makes meals and then puts them into these trays. The trays are sealed, packed in bags with milk and other snacks, and then packed up in bins to be distributed across the city. While working and watching in the kitchen, it was very clear what the social hierarchy was, and I was at the bottom. I soon learned in both of my placements that I was always going to be racing against time. In the next few weeks at the daycare, I was told how many lessons my second graders needed to average in a week, in a day, and I was expected to meet those goals. As a perfectionist, I wanted to make sure I taught all of the required information, but also made sure they understood it. The sheer amount of curriculum was overwhelming, and defiant outbursts from the kids did not help. I would often come home from service exhausted, overwhelmed, frustrated, and full of questions. How do I get through all these lessons? How do I make the kids listen to me? How do I stop them from fidgeting? My unit leader, Michael, listened to all of my thoughts and reminded me that I was not a trained teacher. He also said that whatever teaching I did do for the kids was more than they would have received at home. These words of consolation are what powered me through. In the kitchen, time was also of the essence. If the kitchen got behind, the drivers would get out late, and the kids wouldn't get their food on time. No pressure. My personal goal each day was to see how efficient I could be in whatever task I was doing. What's the best way to bag snacks? How many milk cartons can I pick up with one hand? What's the best way to pack a bag so that all the food doesn't get smushed? There was a point in time where we hadn't been late with any of the food. And that day ended, and the bins didn't go out on time, and someone came storming in telling us to get our rear ends in gear. The cooks were not happy. After getting our butts chewed out, the general consensus was, how dare they come into our kitchen and tell us what to do? It's no joke that cooks can be territorial. As I started and struggled at both of my service placements, my mantra quickly became, the weekend is coming, and it'll get better soon. I clung to weekends because I didn't have to serve, but it was also a time of adventure, and I got to explore the wonderful place that I was now living. My unit and I often didn't plan much for the weekends, but somehow they magically filled up with adventures and fun times. An adventure that we did plan was a trip to Denali National Park and Preserve, which is about 4 hours north of Anchorage. Denali National Park and Preserve is centered around the largest mountain in the United States, Denali, which reaches 20,000 feet in elevation. Typically, when visiting the park, tourists can take park-provided buses to see the majority of the park. But for once a year, the singular road in and out of Denali is open for a weekend, so that people can drive their own cars in and out of the park. In order to be part of the few, there's a lottery, and you guessed it, my unit got a ticket. We drove up Thursday after service, pitched our tents at some free campsites, and hit the road to Denali in the morning. We ended up driving the whole 92 and a half miles of road into the park, and we saw lots of scenery and wildlife, totaling 16 moose, 14 doll sheep, 9 grizzly bears, and a ground squirrel. It also snowed, which was really weird for September, but we were told by a park ranger that it can snow almost any time in Denali. After a day of adventuring, we went back to our campsite, slept, and headed out in the morning. My first few months in Alaska were hard. Everything was new, and I had more responsibilities than I had ever had before. It was hard, and it pushed me to grow, which helped me later on in my time in Alaska. During the season, I wanted there to be change, but I didn't know how. Thankfully, that change came with winter. In Anchorage, winter comes early. About early November was when we got our first snow that stuck. Getting snow, that meant that I had to bundle up when I went to my service placements, but it also meant that my unit and I could try cross-country skiing. From the beginning of the year, we were told as participants that we were expected to walk, bike, or take buses to get to our placements. In the short fall that there was, I often didn't take extra layers because it was nice out. With the changing seasons, I soon learned to check the weather every morning and then decided how to dress from there. I learned that layers are my friend, and I would wear a sweatshirt underneath jackets with a warm hat, gloves, and a scarf. As the seasons changed, winter daily routines quickly arose in the mornings and in the evenings as well. Often, when I got back from service, if there wasn't already evening plans, my unit and I would pile into the van and we would head over to Kincaid, our favorite park, to ski. At the unit house, there were numerous pairs of cross-country skis and boots, and so once we got snow, we got to try it out. We soon picked up the motion of sliding on the snow, and we all enjoyed skiing as a way to exercise and get out of the house. Getting out and doing something is important because with the growing darkness, steps have to be taken to maintain good mental health. Something that not everybody realizes is that Alaska's winters are cold and snowy, but they're also dark. Because Alaska is so far north, there's a limited daylight in winter. Towards the beginning of the winter, there is more typical daylight. A normal day might have the sun rising at 8 and setting at 5. Then the sun started rising later and setting sooner, leading to shorter days. This picture, for example, was taken at 3:45 in the afternoon. Alaskans deal with the winter every year, and their most given advice is to get through the winter, is to get out of the house and be active. Thankfully for my unit, that was cross-country skiing. As December started, it still continued to get dark, but Christmas was around the corner. My unit and I decorated a tree with popcorn and cranberries, and as packages came in from families, we put them under the tree. Life was going pretty well, until it wasn't. It was a Friday morning, and I was riding the bus to my service placement when I got a call from my supervisor. She quickly informed me that everyone at my placement had tested positive for COVID. So instead of taking the bus to my placement, I took another one home and went and got tested. I soon learned through a video call with a doctor that I had in fact tested positive for COVID. Thus began a flurry of phone calls informing the important people in my life that I had tested positive. I was soon isolating in my room and relying on my housemates for food and anything else I needed. The first few days were okay because it felt like a break from service, but it became long. I soon created a daily routine where I would make myself lunch in the kitchen, I would eat in my room, and then take a walk around the neighborhood, which was important. What was harder was the evenings. I was isolated over Christmas, but I was also isolated over winter solstice, which is the shortest day of the year. On winter solstice, the sun rose at 10:15 and set at 3:45, which meant that there were 5.5 hours of sunlight. In the evenings, I would often work on a puzzle or read a book, but it soon got long with the darkness. I remember towards the middle of my isolation, I was talking to my mom, and I told her it was really hard to not feel diseased when I had to wipe down everything I touched outside of my room. Christmas came, which was fun because it was different from the ordinary that had become isolation, and I got to talk with my family, open presents, and eat some good Christmas food. The day after Christmas was my last day of isolation, so it was good, but it was also sad because Christmas was over. The next week of service was hard. When I got back to the daycare, they had changed a lot of procedures to make sure the kids didn't get sick, and I felt guilty. The daycare had shut down because I tested positive for COVID, and now they had all these new rules, and I felt like it was all my fault. When I got back to working in the kitchen, I heard horror stories of how they had to pull in people from other areas in the nonprofit because everyone was out because of COVID. I had to work through all the emotions I was feeling, as well as do my job and recuperate from being sick. After a rough December, my unit and I decided to fight back against the long, long winter by playing hockey and taking adventures. The unit house had skates and some hockey sticks, so when we got together with a family from our church, they said we should invite other people to play as well. Now, when I say that I played regular hockey in Alaska, it sounds like I know what I'm doing, when in reality, I'm not very good. Our church group was comprised of my unit, a dad and their high schooler, and a grandfather and their 4th grade grandson. There were a few people that were pretty good, but most of us didn't know what we were doing. This funky group of people was who I decided to spend my Thursday evenings with, because I enjoyed playing hockey, but also because they were fun to hang out with. I learned how to skate better, and I also learned that sometimes an impromptu church hockey league is what might help you make it through the winter. Another thing that helped my unit was traveling and getting outside of Anchorage. Two big things that stuck out in my mind was my unit's trip to Fairbanks and a snow biking adventure. My unit decided to drive to Fairbanks in February because we wanted to volunteer at the annual World Ice Art Festival, which is held there. Little did we know that our trip would be more than we bargained for. When we were traveling to Fairbanks, we got rerouted because the pass had been covered in snow, which caused us to retrace our steps, head east towards Canada, and then head north towards Fairbanks, which added a considerable amount of travel time. It was all worth it, though, because we got to volunteer at the Ice Art Festival and see the Northern Lights in all their glory. At the Ice Festival, we mostly just cleaned up the ice sculptures and brushed away the snow that had recently fallen. After our volunteering, we headed outside of Fairbanks, and as we were staying, mostly by accident, we got to see the Northern Lights in all their glory. We had seen the Northern Lights before in Anchorage, but nothing like we saw in Fairbanks. They were bright, dancing with streaks of green, red, and even some purple. I found myself gawking at the sky, not thinking about how cold it was or how long I had been out there. It was truly a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Another experience that felt like once in a lifetime was being able to bike to a glacier. We had heard about this snow bike trail, and one weekend decided to rent bikes and try it. It was about 20 miles round trip and was relatively flat, but it was not like biking on pavement. The snow had some give, even when it was packed down, so it took a lot more energy. Thankfully, everything that could have gone wrong didn't, and we had perfect weather for our expedition. This bike trip was something that I was really nervous about because it was very outside of my comfort zone. I don't really bike very often, and I was afraid of all of the worst case scenarios. But once I did it, I was so glad that I had. Soon after our snow biking, there was breakup season. Now, breakup season is when everything starts melting. All of the snow that had accumulated from winter has to go somewhere, so it creates a lot of puddles and slush. Breakup season is kind of gross, but it means that spring is coming. Spring is a wonderful time of year anywhere, but it is especially wonderful in Alaska. Everything is finally green and warm, and it feels like a new lease on life. My service placements had their changes and challenges, but I felt more prepared to handle them. I created rules with my second graders so they didn't have free reign of the classroom, and I could stay in control. Before every single service day at the kitchen, I went in with the mantra of, I have no idea what's going to happen today. Let's see. Some days we would have so many people in the kitchen, at the end of the day, we would be rearranging pasta in the back because we had nothing to do. Other days, we would be short-staffed and be struggling just to get the food out on time. Every once in a while, our head chef would be asked to make food for a special event, so that always threw a wrench in our plans. Every day was different, but no matter the challenge, I felt confident that I could face it head-on and get through the day. Because it was warm and light out, my unit and I did a lot of camping. I mention the light because in summer, the light is opposite to winter, and the sun rises early and sets late. When I woke up, it would often be up, and it wouldn't set until 10 in the evening. With this freedom, we took 2 trips to towns south of Anchorage, which are Homer and Valdez. In Homer, we camped on the Spit, which is a small strip of land that reaches out into the bay. We spent a lot of time on the beaches, looking in tide pools, and just walking around. On our trip to Valdez, we explored Valdez and the surrounding area, but we also stopped in McCarthy, which is a rural town just 40 miles off of the main road, and it's located in Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Wrangell St. Elias is the largest national park in the United States, and it is larger than the country of Switzerland. My unit and I were able to hike on a glacier, and we came across these pools of water called moulins, which are absolutely stunning. On both of these trips, I was able to see the Alaska that I had heard about but not yet experienced. It was the Alaska where everything was alive and growing. So I did all of these things. I had all of these experiences. What did I learn? I feel like my 10 months are best summed up with a short story. I was standing at the bus stop in June, waiting for my bus, when an older couple came and sat down on a bench beside me. I tried not to make eye contact with them because you don't want to make eye contact with the people at the bus stop. But the older woman managed to catch my eye. Like all good conversations, this one started about the weather. We talked about how pretty the blue sky was and how warm it was. The older woman then mentioned that her and her husband were in Anchorage for a doctor's visit in the native hospital, where Alaska Natives are able to receive health care for free. She then went on to say that this was her first time her and her husband had left their remote village since the start of the pandemic, and only then was their village starting to come together as a community. I told her I also felt disconnected from others because of the pandemic, and that these were hard times for all of us. My bus soon came, ending our conversation, but as I thought about the interaction later, I described it as meeting Jesus at the bus station. Connecting with this stranger reminded me that everyone is created in the image of God and should be treated as such. So I went to Alaska to serve others, but I got so much more in return. I gained a small, loving community that supported me as I faced life head on. I received life lessons and gained confidence in myself, which helped mold me to be who I am today. And it reminded me that I do enjoy a good adventure. So as you go today, I challenge you then to think about ways that you can grow here in Heston. They don't have to be large, but I do think that they will help you out in the long run. Thank you. Yeah, so you guys can ask me questions if you'd like. If you don't, that's okay too. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I didn't mention.
I have a really deep and thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Did you see any bears and moose and wild animals?
Yeah, so we saw a lot of wildlife in Denali, but moose are actually very common in the city of Anchorage. Especially in wintertime, they just kind of come into the city looking for food. So often on my commutes in the morning walking, I would be very aware of my surroundings because moose are quite dangerous. But yeah, you can average 2 to 3 moose a week in Anchorage if you're really looking for them.
Do you have any funny stories to share from just your time up there or involving Michael or anything, the unit leader?
Wow. Yeah, there were lots of shenanigans. I don't know, one stories at the beginning was we have things called, we have times where we come together as a unit, and one of my first things that I did was a silent time outside, and I accidentally left my leader, Michael, out in our backyard by himself a lot longer than I intended. And he's a very social person, so I felt quite bad when he came in complaining of feeling lonely in the backyard.
I'm curious, what advice would you give to other people thinking about a service year?
I would say do it. This year of service for me, I knew that I already wanted to come to Heston. I knew that I probably wanted to pursue nursing. But it was just a year for me to actually kind of live in the real world and be able to do something out of the ordinary. So if you're thinking about it, do it. It'll be worthwhile. Alrighty. Well, thank you all for coming, and you're dismissed from the front.